Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, January 17th, 2025, and Dick Laurent is dead. Actually, I'm sorry, it's actually David Lynch that's dead. David Lynch, a favorite director of mine. I will stand hard unapologetically for David Lynch. And I knew already that David Lynch had I think it was either lung cancer or emphysema, some kind of complication due from being a lifelong tobacco smoker. In interviews, he mentioned that he tried to quit before, but it was one of those habits that he could never really kick. He was always just he the last few apparently he had to spend time isolated indoors because his health was in a fragile condition, and just recently, the other day, he passed away. He's no longer with us. The line "Dick Laurent is dead" is from the movie Lost Highway. It opens with this. Actually, I think it opens and closes with this like cold call where the guy, it's a phone call where just Dick Laurent is dead. So that's just something that's on my mind. I was considering making another video about, we have a Venus-Saturn conjunction right now, which obviously Saturn has to do with old age, with death, with passing, and it's kind of gloomy. It's a gloomy situation. I made a video already about Venus and the Saturn conjunction, and I was suggesting that, there could be a certain kind of appreciation of Saturnine things, and I used the idea of like a cigar or something, right? But there's also this thing going on where Hollywood, I haven't really mentioned that yet in my it's kind of an odd synchronicity, I think. The fact that LA, Hollywood, is burning, David Lynch being a very LA kind of guy. If you think about his movies, like Mulholland Drive is a very Hollywood LA movie. The Lost Highway, very LA, I would say. David Lynch was a kind of like Hollywood character, right? Yeah, I remember maybe I'll put in the description. What's been on my mind is that he did something with Flying Lotus a while back, where there was like this idea of a huge fire, right? And there's some kind of strange thing that David Lynch and Flying Lotus made this collaboration where they were talking about the coming of a huge fire, and then David Lynch passes away with Los Angeles or Hollywood in flames. And there's a certain kind of grief, obviously. I mean, even though you know that people aren't going to live forever, there's still obviously a sense of grief that this creator is no longer with us. He's been a huge influence on me. I have to also just admit that sometimes, as I make these astrology videos, I've taken the approach of sometimes I honestly imitate David Lynch. Like, I pretend I'm Gordon Cole, right? If you guys are familiar with Gordon Cole, I'll like come on and I'll be like, "Hello everybody, today's Dan's astrology, and today we're looking at the lunar nodes shifting from Virgo. I have just completed my lunar nodal return in Aries and Libra, and the lunar nodes are now shifting into Pisces and Virgo. We're going to have the south node in Virgo and the north node in Pisces, and we're going to tell you all about it." So sometimes I just go into that mode, like, especially if there's a time when I'm like, I don't really like, there'll be times where I want to make an astrology video, but I feel like to just, you kind of have to put on a bit of a character, or like this idea of like David Lynch would do these things where he would like do these weather reports, right? Where you just like, you don't really have to explain why you're like you're turning on your camera to do a weather report in the morning. If you throw on like the David Lynch, Gordon Cole being like, the sky today is partially cloudy. There's a cool breeze in the air, but it's just like, so I don't know. I have this ongoing appreciation for David Lynch, even though he's dead, and I'm just making note of that. There's a certain sense of the post. There's a certain January issue, right? Where January often like part of what attracts me to astrology is that regardless of tropical astrology in particular, right? That regardless of whatever is happening in the sky, that there's often this kind of there's a kind of a gloomy post after Christmas is over, after New Year's is over. The first few weeks of January can be a bummer. It can be depressing, right? It can be gloomy, and there's also kind of interesting is that like I've been appreciating more the actual visual, the actual naturalistic experience of seeing the Venus and Saturn conjunction in the sky. If I take my dogs out to go pee or whatever, I'll look up at the sky and just see very obviously Venus and Saturn there as this naturalistic phenomenon that has a sort of resonant meaning with these kinds of gloomy forces, because Saturn is the darkest planet that is of the farthest out darkest planet that stands for these winter. It's a ruler of these winter signs, and but I'm just mentioning that the other thing, the main thing that I want to focus on for this video is that we have the nodal shift happening, right? We have the south node in Virgo and the north node in Pisces now, meaning that I'm basically, as a person, I just went through a nodal return, and it looked particularly gnarly. So I'm thankful that I've made it this far, and that I'm here to deliver you this video about the North Node in Pisces, the South Node in Virgo. And the thing about this is that what we're dealing with is not just the nodal shift. We're dealing with the nodal shift in relation to all these other transits going on. And with that in mind, we've got a stellium in Pisces right now, where we've got Venus, we've got Saturn, we've got Neptune, and leading the big transit of this year is going to be Saturn conjunct Neptune in the very beginning degree of Aries, which I think a lot of us are whatever. Like, if you look at what's going on in the world, there's obviously I don't want to incite fear and panic and more doom and gloom than necessary, but this is a Saturn and Neptune, unfortunately, is a gloomy transit. And I think there's a part of what makes astrology helpful is that it's not to say that the planets are literally causing these things to happen, but rather that everything follows a kind of like divine timing. Everything follows a divine order. And that if you can say that you're like, wow, this January feels particularly more gloomy than usual, well, we've got this Saturn and Neptune thing to deal with. And then now that the North Node has moved into Pisces, the North Node typically has the effect of increasing both the good and the bad associated with whatever is going on where the North Node is. It's basically just like a big magnifying glass, or a big like signal booster of whatever is going on. And unfortunately, with Saturn and Neptune, this may amplify the sense of gloominess associated with these signs. Because first of all, it's a water sign, so it's going to be more emotionally resonant. And the fact that Saturn can feel, it's the alchemical lead, right? It can feel like, either it can sometimes be frustrating. It can feel like you're dealing with a kind of like ignorance or stupidity, or a kind of a dullness, a kind of mundane kind of thing where, everything's boring, right? It can, or you maybe run into your own limits, right? Or you have to look after the sick and the elderly or something. And with Neptune mixed in with all this, there's a certain kind of a salvific, maybe religious or mystical dimension as well. And the thing is, now that North Node's in Pisces. The first planet that's going to conjunct the North Node in Pisces is going to be Neptune, right? And so there's this thing about Neptune that, Neptune has its good and its bad, right? And Neptune and Pisces, I think there's a sort of emphasis on, I'm not gonna approach this like I'm an expert, but I'm gonna tell you that it was interesting. I saw recently that there was a old artifact that was discovered. After I record this video, I will go in the show notes, maybe I'll make a reference to this, but there's an artifact that was discovered, which was like an early Christian artifact or scroll, and it had the Pisces symbol on it, which was interesting. And there's this idea that from the Jungian perspective, Carl Jung, and like I haven't read this book all the way through, but I've owned this book for like a really long time, like over 10 years. And this is part of what got me into astrology in the first place, was an interest in Carl Jung. But like to try to just read Carl Jung like just on his own, it's like, and try to like, it's actually, I don't know, I found it more beneficial just to get into astrology and then approach it from that perspective rather than just trying to read lots of Carl Jung without being into astrology. But Carl Jung was really into this idea of the precession of the equinoxes and these zodiacal ages, where the Christian era was defined by the age of Pisces, and that we are, it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius, basically. Which, if you take that whole system seriously, I think we're still a ways out before the real age of Aquarius starts. But it's an interesting idea to think about, the idea of the Christian fish symbol, right, in relation to Pisces, which is two fishes. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's somewhat similar. There's some kind of issue, personal tensions around the whole issue of religion and Christianity, and it could also be cult dynamics, or they're kind of like, part of the problem is there could be a kind of naivety or a kind of there's a question with Saturn and Neptune around maturity and responsibility, or like life lessons that are learned over time, versus a kind of naive innocence where you like it's the kind of thing where people who like sign up for and join a cult, there might be obvious problems that you're just like overly naive about, and that you're kind of have the wool pulled over your eyes or something like that. Or like somebody who's, like I have this tension with my mother, for example, where she is, it's kind of, I think a lot of it has to do with my mom being of that baby boomer generation who lived through the 60s, who lived through the 70s. And like, I wasn't there in the 70s, right? You listen to a lot of these accounts of the older generations who had to like go through this whole countercultural revolution of the 60s and the 70s, and had to witness firsthand people becoming like Jesus freaks, or like, or getting carried away with whatever. And I think that that's kind of like a real kind of a risk and danger. I was watching a cult documentary a while back, and they're talking about the Jesus freaks, where like the Jesus freaks would do things like they try to live without any money at all, right? They're like saying that we live like it's God will take care of you. Though if you think you have to like work for money and you have to like provide a living, that just shows that you don't trust in God. So we're just going to like give up all our worldly possessions, and we're just going to like hitchhike around and rely on like the sheer goodwill of strangers to take care of us, because that's really just the love of Jesus, right? And so there's this kind of resentment for the Jesus freak because of this, right? There's this kind of people who think, or like the spiritual, like kind of spiritual renunciation, right? There are certain people who are like, we're going to renunciate all our worldly desires for material objects, and then just trust that God's going to take care of us. And then, but these people end up being like, panhandling on the side of the street, asking for handouts and stuff like that. And there's a kind of like, kind of a jaded resentment against this, or there's kind of this flip, right? There could be a jaded resentment against all the new age gurus and the Jesus freaks, and there's also, I have to also admit, I don't know if it's like a bio-regional thing, but I find that just like being a West Coaster, there seems to be a lot of people, like, I don't know, there are Christian churches, there is a certain like BC Bible Belt, but there's I don't know if it's my family, but there's this real, like, there's a certain cultural attitude where people just really don't like Christianity around here. I think a lot of it probably has to do with the history of colonialism, but it kind of like, for me, I always have to navigate this problem where I'm kind of I'm a little bit more interested, even if I was just going to like study this in a detached way, as if like, learn about the Bible, learn about theology, learn about the rather than just learning to be like a devout follower, learning from a critical perspective, learning about the problems inherent, learning about some of the or there could be things like mythic literalism is often a big problem, right? Where people, if you believe in the Bible, you have to literally believe in like creationism, or you have to literally believe in Adam and Eve, and you literally have to believe in Cain and Abel. Like, these were all actual real people that those stories like literally happened in the most concrete way, and you can't read it as a metaphor or a allegory or a story. It has to be like, this is literally what happened. And you've got people like, you can see that like Mel Gibson appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast recently, and Mel Gibson was talking about how he doesn't believe in the dinosaurs. He doesn't believe in Darwinian evolution. He believes that man literally showed up on the scene like a fully developed human being, and that it wasn't like that whole there's this whole like, I think this is kind of like part of what might get amplified with the North Node in Pisces amplifying Neptune and Saturn, is that like, if you can imagine like Saturn being something that's kind of like old and crusty, that is like, rather than having this kind of fresh, youthful, enthusiastic curiosity for like the divine mysteries, you could have this like really old and crusty perspective that either is a very like hard yes or no, like Saturn's like a boundary, right? You can have this really hard and crusty perspective that's like, well, if it's not right, then why did they put it in the Bible? If it's not true, it's the most moronic way to like deal with it. But it's like, if you're dealing with a bunch of, if you're dealing with a bunch of people, like, that's their capacity to understand things, you're not going to get you can't just like, you can explain the problem of mythic literalism to people over and over and over, but it still doesn't seem to like make any progress. There's going to be people who are just like, the Bible, like, it's also funny. Like, I recently have also been watching these some documentaries from this culture jamming multimedia art group called Negativland, they're kind of like a band, but instead of making like real music, they're more of this kind of like synthesizer noise, multimedia collage, kind of culture jamming group, and this kind of influences the kind of art that I like to make with synthesizers, things like that. At one point in time, the group Negativland put something out called Christianity is Stupid, right? And it's basically just like like, this is kind of I can totally sympathize with this like, from a certain perspective. You could just say like, yeah, Christianity is dumb, Christianity is stupid. You got to be like, like a retard or something like that to be a Christian, right? To actually believe some of the stuff that's in the. But there's something about like, there's some other perspective that makes me more sympathetic with religious things. I don't know if I don't know. I'm kind of just riffing on this anyways. I mean, it's important to include this sort of this dynamic in the conversation. I think around religion, spirituality, Christianity, regardless of what your belief is, and because if you look at what's happening with the South Node in Virgo, right? The South Node in Virgo is the inverse of the North Node in Pisces. The North Node creates an increase of this sort of dynamic it could either be with Neptune. There's a strong Neptune, Pisces, the Christian thing, forgiveness, acceptance, right? They're letting go, right? There's a kind of like, there's also, I think there's something very nostalgic and sentimental about Pisces, where you're like looking back on all these things that happened in the past and all the people who've done you wrong and all this, but you can like forgive them, and you can have compassion, and you can like love your enemy and turn the other cheek and all this kind of stuff. And there's with that may be one of the positives with this, right? With the South Node in Virgo, there is an issue where the Virgo stands for the virgin or the maiden, right? There's this woman in the field who is an agricultural, has an agricultural significance of planning for the future, right? Ability to look ahead, plan for the future. And not only this, but there's this idea that the deeper meaning of the Virgo field maiden is this idea to be in the world but not of it, right? The idea that you have some kind of rather than get too hung up on the whole, religious connotations of preserving your maidenly purity, like the Virgin Mary or something like that. You can read it from the point of like, there's some, you have your born nature and you have your unborn nature. This is something what the Zen Buddhists would say, right? From the Zen Buddhists say there's this whole worldly born nature that is subject to gain and loss, coming and going, all this kind of stuff. But you have some part of you that is transcendent, basically. That is not of the world, but somehow you have this link to some sort of transcendent virtue, right? And it's kind of like from that position, we have the ability to deal with the practical, grounded issues of the world, but having a certain kind of level of cool-headed detachment where we can make plans and we can organize and we can deal with things rationally and we're not overly attached. But unfortunately, the problem is that all those good, virtuous things that we associate with Virgo are going to be minimized, basically. All the good and the bad that go with Virgo is going to be minimized, or have the volume turned down on, and all the volume is going to be cranked up on Pisces, where we have Saturn, we have Neptune, we currently have Venus there, and also we're going to be having a Venus retrograde that goes through. Venus is going to go into Aries and then have a retrograde that leads her back into Pisces. So we're going to have a Venus retrograde getting mixed up in all this North Node in Pisces business. So there's all this current moment that we're in right now where it feels kind of melancholy, it feels kind of gloomy. Unfortunately, and there's a kind of visionary thing with Neptune, the imagination, that we can see the death of these visionary artistic people like David Lynch, who has been so important in my life, I've really appreciated his art. There's something about this. We have to, with a kind of a stoic attitude, I suppose, we can look at the chart and we can say that, like, don't expect this feeling to, like, just immediately get better, right? That we're going to have this sort of, like, it could be depressing, it could be melancholy, it could be dreary. There's this other thing about it, too, where it's like, I'm looking after a couple of aging dogs. They're about like 14 years old. One dog, I think 14 and 13, if I got my numbers right. They're little dogs though, so they could have a few more years left in them, right? But there's something about it where one dog is much in better physical shape in terms of being able to walk around faster, and then the other dog is like really slow, right? And this morning I I woke up as soon as I got out of bed. This little dog is at my feet, waiting to go for a morning walk, and I take the one dog out first and I get to walk faster, right? And I get to like get a little bit more exercise, and then I come back, and then the second dog is now awake, and the second dog wants to go for a walk. So I take the second dog take the two together, but I have to go much slower, right? And because this dog is getting older, doesn't move very fast, and the thing is, the point is about this is that the problem with Saturn and Pisces and Neptune and Pisces is that there can be a certain acceptance of things as they are without trying to change them, where you're not expecting you're not expecting an old dog to be a young dog. You accept the old dog with its limitations. It has to move slow. But there's something about it where I have certain there's something about this I often like struggle with, but it's like I find it better to be out there feeling slightly frustrated. Like it's sort of like, like with Forrest Gump, where I don't like Forrest Gump, but in Forrest Gump there's a scene where Forrest Gump has these like the metal braces on his legs, and he's like he has the ability to run fast, but he's stuck with this cumbersome metal braces but he like runs out of the metal and they all fall apart, and he's like, oh yeah, I can run now, I can go fast. It's like I have to do this thing where I feel like there's all these like people out for their morning jog, and they're like running fast, and they're like, there's something about like that's like it rewards your endorphin system, or your like whatever you get this runner high, right? You get like, oh, I'm going out in the morning, I'm really working out, I'm really exercising, I'm the king of the, whereas I'm like stuck with these fucking old dogs, and I'm just like, you have to wear a fucking big ass parka and be like, it's fucking cold, it's the middle of the winter, and I've got these little dogs that can't go, like you have to like go really slowly, right? Now it could be that if there was like, if you were an old person that you weren't very mobile, you could like, no, I'm not going to get into that, right? The thing is, like, I'm also looking after my elderly mother, who is also like, she sort of has mobility issues where she like, sometimes it would be like, if I could just get it so that rather than me walking the dogs, it's my mother walking the dogs, then she could be like getting some exercise, the dogs could be getting some exercise and all this. But unfortunately, it does, like, my mom is just not a dog walker. Like, it's when the dogs that I have, my dad, it's basically my dad's dog. My dad had a chiropractic's office, and this little dog would just hang out at the office, greet his customers. He would have this dog at work with him, and then my dad used to do all sorts of like, my dad used to let this dog run around on the mud flats. As he did this Spartina project, where he was, he would take me out with him, and we would try to tackle this invasive weed on the mud flats and let this little dog just run free or whatever, right? And I was talking to my mom about, like, if our dog's getting older, like, wouldn't it be nice maybe as a family we could like take our dogs to like the beach or something, or take the dogs to a dog park and sort of like have a family picnic, and and like let them have a kind of a nice sort of time together. And what my mother said is that, like, well, there are a lot of people at dog parks and off-leash dog areas where they have like Rottweilers and pit bulls and all this kind of stuff, and like sometimes people's dogs just get mauled, right? So the idea is that, like, if these dogs only have I don't know how long they're going to live, but it's important basically that we don't give them this chance to just sort of like run free and have a little happy moment, because there's always the risk that some asshole has a pit bull that's just going to maul your dog, and then you're always going to remember, oh, the sweet little dog just got killed by somebody else's fucking Rottweiler or something like that. So we have to basically keep these dogs on a tight leash, have sort of like tight watch over them, control them, and so we can like just be stuck with this sort of like but I don't like, I try very carefully I avoid bringing this kind of stuff up because it's like it doesn't make sense for me to get, the animals are basically innocent. They don't have any say in this. It doesn't make sense for me to get or like frustrated at a dog for being a dog, or it's like getting frustrated at somebody who's old for being old, or like it's all the same thing as if somebody has a disability, right? It doesn't. You might be really frustrated having to deal with somebody who's old and senile, or somebody who has a disability, but you have to have a certain degree of acceptance for the situation as it is. That you can't, there's no way that you can make an old person be young again. There's no way that you can make a old dog be a young dog. There's no way that you can make a disabled person be undisabled. And so you have to basically kind of accept things as they are and not force the externality to adapt itself to you. You have to adapt yourself to the externality. Right? You have to accept the world as it is and see how can I be of service to this world as it is, even if it's inherently frustrating, even if it seems limiting, even if it makes you feel like you're trapped in some situation that you can't get out of. It's not, the more that you make the external wrong, the more that you are, you're not seeing that you have the ability to transform yourself so that you're in service to the external situation that's not really up to you to have a say over, right? Because why would you have a say over it, right? I think it's also interesting with the North Node and Pisces like this, that like I said, the big transit is going to be Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and there's something about this which is like, we have to remember that the zodiac is a wheel. Sometimes this is associated with like the Wheel of Fortune in tarot, right? This idea that good luck and bad luck are interconnected. That you might have times in life where you're on the come up, where things are going well for you. And then there's other times when things are not going so well. Or there's times when you're winning, times when you're losing, times when you're making gains, times when you're making losses. But that this is a kind of a cycle that's infinite, that keeps going. That you're never going to be able to have a stable grip on the situation. It's always going to be changing. It's always going to be moving. And that if you think you're going to make there's something about Pisces and Aries that the way that we do astrology is that we use Aries as the beginning of the zodiac, even though it's in the springtime, right? We use this kind of beginning of spring as like the start of the astrological new year. I know some astrologers make this argument for using Cancer. Let's start it at Cancer and end at Gemini rather than going from Aries to Pisces. But if you go with this Aries to Pisces thing, it's like there's this whole kind of like, Saturn being the planet to do with time, old father time, Chronos, old age, and being the sort of limits and the accepting the responsibilities of adulthood and maturity and all this, and the kind of forgive and let go and all this kind of thing. And then there's something about this Saturn Neptune transit that once you cross this boundary into Aries, it's like there's something about it where it's like it's supposed to be the end, but it just keeps going. And there's some kind of it's kind of interesting, I think, anyways, that it's like this. We're in this moment. There's going to be this big lead up to the Saturn and Neptune conjunction at the very beginning of Aries, which is, I mean, this is what makes it dramatic, is that, or interesting anyways, is that there's a kind of like the emphasis on the beginning and the ending of Pisces and Aries, and that there's a certain, there could be a very kind of like, there's a very sharp difference between Pisces and Aries, right? Where Pisces, there's this kind of fog of emotion, or like you're in a kind of a daydream, or you're all these sentimental memories and emotions, and you're all this mood, versus like Aries being like, okay, now it's time to get stuff done. Now we got to do it. Now we got to go, right? No time for like, put your Kleenex box and stop, drying your tears. Put that, collect, there's no time to sit around grieving. We got to fucking run. We got to go, right? And then, but then you've got Saturn, which is going to be like, is in its fall in Aries, right? Because this idea that Aries is often this thing that's like fast, youthful, that's like that just wants to get, like, there's just what I noticed too about I'm approaching my 40s, and I'm just the whole online culture, and there's a whole tendency towards like the manosphere or the alt-right or something like that, or these kinds of like young men. There's a certain kind of yang-y energy that, this kind of yang-y energy could also be, it's not just confined to a gender binary, because there could be plenty of women who share the same kind of attitude, right? But there's this kind of idea that when you're youthful, you have some sort of like vital capacity for action, for activity, for not just sitting back and thinking about things, and not just sitting back and emotionally processing things and grieving things. You actually want to do something. You actually want to, you see the whole situation in front of you, and you're like, what can I do to make it better? And I don't mean what can I do in terms of like forgiving and for being compassionate and like letting go. I mean, like, what can I actually do? Like, with my muscles, with my body, with my personal will, with my drive, my energy. I want to actually do something, right? Rather than just sit here, feel helpless, like I can't do anything, like the whole world is fucked up and I can't do anything about it. I want to actually do something, right? And the problem about this is that with Saturn and Neptune are going to be in this position where there's this conflict between being like, we have limits, we're too old, we're disabled, we're senile, we can't remember anything, we forget, or it's like having this little dog that you just want to go for a run, man. You just want to jog. You just want to sprint. You just want to take off running and like try to achieve something. But you've got all this fucking baggage that you just have to fucking drag around behind you, right? And then you have to be like, I accept that this is my responsibility to be responsible for all this baggage that I have to drag around, and I can't just bolt off to the horizon like a fucking marathon sprinter or something like that. I have to take it slow. I have to slow down, take it one step at a time. But there's a sense, like, I've been doing, with all the emotions that have been coming up recently, with this Venus-Saturn conjunction, with this stellium in Pisces and all that. I've been doing some like I Ching stuff, and what the I Ching has been emphasizing for me is a number of things, right? I'm not going to get into the specific hexagrams, but there's certain things that are emphasized for me, in that the idea of like main character syndrome, right? Feeling there's this kind of idea where we live in a really, there's often this cliche that the Western society is more individualistic, and that where the I Ching comes from is a place that is a more communal, or there's more of a sense of we space, right? Of a people that exist as a coherent kind of unity of a people. And that there's something about using the I Ching that's starting to feel like it's much more connected into this kind of perspective where it's not just about you as a solar ego hero, that you are self-actualizing your independence or something like that. It has more to do with you are not the main character in this situation. You are a helper, right? You are a member of a community, and even if our community is fragmented so that your only community is your family, you have responsibility to your family. You're not just there to be like, these are all my I'm the king and these are all my servants to just do what I order them to do. You yourself are there to play a supportive role in this whole collective thing going on. And there's this kind of aggravating quality of it where there's a sense that the more I try to take responsibility for the collective that I'm a part of, whether that's my community, whether that's my country, whether that's my town, whether that's whether I belong to a certain, I don't know, a spiritual tradition or a kind of a philosophical school of thought, where you're doing something in service for something that's bigger than you, right? But there's this kind of sense that you're the more I do that, I don't even know if where do I belong doing that? Is this am I doing this because this is my kind of destiny to fulfill this purpose, that I belong to this country, I belong to this family, I belong to this society, I belong to this religion even, and what I'm doing is in service to, but I don't know if I belong to any of this. And there's this society makes it you feel like the only thing you belong doing is being this hyper individualized person who's just speeding off into the horizon away from all of this, and that if you're not doing that, there must be something wrong with you. Right? And so there's this kind of thing that it's there's this kind of thing that this idea that what if the thing where you think that you belong to is actually toxic, or then it's actually not helpful, and that you're just confusing yourself by doing the I Ching because it's from another culture. It's not even you're just appropriating something from ancient China where people had more of a sense of connection to community, connection to the environment, and then none of it makes sense. And that actually the answer is just to be a hyper individualized person who is not dependent on anybody, right? But there's this kind of I'm just feeling really in the midst of this kind of conflict, but this idea that there's this sort of James Hillman once said that the surest way to beat the devil is through patience, right? That if anything, there's the temptation towards, the temptation is to lose patience, right? To lose patience with all these people who can't keep up with you, who can't move as fast as you, right? And so there's this kind of I think this is also the problem about the risk of fascism, basically, because what if you have a whole bunch of people that aren't able to contribute to society, that are basically just a drain on your economy? What are you going to do? Throw them all in the gas chamber? Are you just going to euthanize them all? Are you just going to be we're going to have a society that's only of people that can provide, productive labor to the workforce, and anybody who is, disabled, elderly, senile, or unproductive, we just have to kill them all or something. I hope it doesn't come to that, right? But there's this kind of sense that at the same time, I'm just kind of I wish I had, my own experience of life just feels I have to, is that it's not it's reminding me that it's not about me, it's about this thing that I'm a part of that is greater from me, and that how can I be a service to that. But there's something about the Saturn and Neptune together, it feels like a lead weight, or it feels like this emotional burden that you just want to get rid of it. You're why is it my job to or what is about the situation that I have to feel rotten, or I have to feel miserable, or why is it on me? What if I have this feeling where I feel like I can't do anything because I am just overloaded with this emotion of grief, or this emotion of the world is I'm just I'm wherever it is, I'm not even sure, where am I, if I'm not supposed to be here doing this, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, where there's this kind of like, there's this kind of like this melancholy or this longing for like this, whatever this thing is that's presenting itself in the, this surely can't be it. Like really, like my whole life purpose is just to like make sure my dad's little dog, who, like my dad passed away over a decade ago, and I have to like keep looking after his little dog, and that's my life purpose in life, and I'm, you know, and it's like no, like there's a sense that like I'm not, you know, there's this idea, this New Agers often say, you know, you're exactly where you need to be, but what if you're not? What if you're not exactly where you need to be? What if you're not at all where you need to be? And that, you know, there you have to like come back home to be in service for where you really belong. And it's not about you trying to realize your own little ego. It's like you being of service to this bigger thing. But then when you're doing that at home, you got a bunch of people, you know, it's like, what does that mean? Like going, you don't do Taoism or you don't do the I Ching, you do Christianity. Well, if you do that, then my mother and my sister will hate me. They'll think that I'm just a Jesus freak. They'll want to disown me. So what am I supposed to do? Go to the church and expect them to be the long lost family that my family isn't going to be for me? No, you know, do you become, if I read you know, philosophy, you know, do I expect that I'm just going to find a community with a bunch of like academic snobs? Probably not, right? Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, right? So I don't know. I'm just sort of, I guess I'm doing my best to just like, I have to admit, we also just had a full moon in Cancer that was conjunct Mars, and there's something about with the Mars retrograde in Cancer, all this stuff going on in Pisces, and it's just like a moody, emotional kind of January, and I'm just expressing myself on my YouTube channel. I'm doing my best with it. I don't know if this is a, I'm just, this is what it feels like heading into this one with the recent nodal shift, how it resonates for me. We're gonna be having the North Node be amplifying, you know, what do you do when the North Node is amplifying Neptune and it's all about being forgiving and well, there's just you're either forgiving or accepting, and you're making this into a real virtue, or else you're just blind by that. And you shouldn't actually be forgiving. You know, you're trying to jump the gun to like, we're gonna forgive everybody and be compassionate when there's actually maybe a problem that needs to be looked at, that needs to be sorted out, maybe, right? I don't know. Thanks for watching, anyways. Hope everybody's holding up under this sort of obviously not the easiest dynamic heading into 2025. Stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.